My cosy, safe, controlled world of DIY has been turned upside down. I've had a couple of builders here for a week now, tearing my house apart, something I've been dreading and looking forward to in equal measure. So I thought I'd do a series of videos cataloguing each week what we've been up to. And in this week's video, we've got disconnection of radiators, temporary kitchen install, removal of a load-bearing wall in the kitchen, steels going up in the ceiling, and a new ceiling to support my daughter's bedroom. Now, the big question is whether I can keep the videos coming whilst project managing a renovation job like this. But what I'm really keen to do during this process is pass on to you all the benefits of what I've learned. And believe you me, there's a steep learning curve on a job like this. Now, the first job I had to do before the builders turned up was to disconnect 4 radiators from my central heating system. Partly because one of them was on this wall that was coming out, but also because all 4 would be superseded by the underfloor heating system that we're hoping to install in this kitchen. Now, when we moved into the house in 2010, a local plumbing company updated our central heating system to a 2-pipe system, where basically you have each radiator simultaneously heating up off the central flow and return pipes. Compare that with an old-fashioned system, single pipe, where the hot water has to go through every single radiator one by one on the system. So you can imagine the last radiator on the line takes a long time to heat up. Now, the plumbing company used this micro bore pipe, which I don't terribly like because it's obviously got a reduced flow than what you'd get from, say, 15mm copper. But the reason they did this is because they could hide it in the wall without having to channel the brickwork. And I had to disconnect that micro bore from the copper flow return pipes upstairs. With the heating on, I've identified where the hot water pipes go up the wall. So now I've just got to mark the area to remove from the ceiling. I think there's a joist there. And with that area marked for removal, I can use my multi-tool to cut the plasterboard away. And that simple tap test got me bang on the centre of the joist, revealing some shocking soldering and cables resting on the pipes. Now, I've got a pressurised heating system, and to drain it, what I generally do is connect a hose to one of the drain-off valves with the other end outside in the garden, which enables me to depressurise the system and drain off enough water to disconnect the radiator. I decided to use compression stop ends to cap off the pipes, using my multi-tool to cut the pipes because I couldn't get a pipe cutter into this space. The second rad was more straightforward, as I could disengage the speed fitting, clean the pipes and wire wool, and add the stop end with a bit of jointing compound before tightening the fitting. I'm sure push fit stop ends would be okay, but this is in a ceiling and I just trust compression fittings more than I do the speed fit. You know, when you apply that last half turn on the pipe that you've got a joint that's not going to fail you. And with that done, I could repressurise the system, opening the bleed valves on the radiators upstairs that had emptied to remove all the air from the system. And I also need to redose the system with inhibitor. We don't know how long we're going to be out of this space for. We've only just decided to move the kitchen in here now the supporting wall is down, and we haven't even designed the new kitchen yet. So we needed to come up with a temporary kitchen to tide us over while all this is going on. So I decided to set up a mini kitchen in our hallway. And the first job was to lug out our old Libra fridge out the kitchen, round the side of the house and in the other door, using this brilliant old trolley that I found hiding in a bush when we bought the cottage. I decided I needed some sort of cupboard or shelving system in the temporary kitchen. And although I've got some sheets of MDF lying around from the wardrobe build series of videos you might have seen, I realised I could repurpose the shelving system from the kids' playroom, which was here. So I set about reconfiguring the shelves to fit the new space, and as you can see, my Ryobi HP circular saw does not have a very impressive dust extraction system, in spite of being connected to my Cyclone dust extractor. I use these Spax 4x50mm MDF screws I had from the wardrobe build, old scraps of wood to strengthen the shelves and carcass, and with a little help from my laser level, some shelf supports I had left over from a previous project. And finally I secured it to the wall with this bracket. It's not complete yet, I still need to incorporate a cooker I could do with the dishwasher and washing machine nearby, but it's not a bad start. and I'm using my MFT workbench as a table. So the plan is to create a much larger room than we had by removing this load-bearing wall, which would then need supporting with a steel. We also wanted to remove this chimney, and not wanting the disruption of demolishing the chimney in my daughter's room upstairs, we decided to remove it at ground level only and support it with another steel running at right angles to the main one. Now this would create a heavy point load where that chimney supporting beam hit the two main ones. So my structural engineer specified these massive 255mm by 145mm steels to support that main load. Not ideal, my ceiling joists are only 7" or 178mm, because I'd have a good 75mm jutting down from the ceiling. But that was just something I thought I was going to have to put up with. And we'll be using these two other steels for a bifold door install. The builders arrived a couple of days later. I think they've been on site about 7 days now, armed with a load of Acrow props, and quickly supported the upstairs wall by fixing these 2 lines of Acrows to support the joists in each room, which in turn would hold up the load-bearing walls upstairs, not to mention the roof above. I had imagined a more invasive process where they had to take the floors up in the corridor and insert needles through the supporting walls actually upstairs, but I'm told that this is not necessary. We'll come on to whether that was completely effective a little bit later on in the video. By the end of the first day, the main wall was gone, and on day 2 we made a bit of a discovery. The chimney didn't continue upstairs and didn't therefore need supporting with that second steel. And my builder suggested that without that point load on the main steel, we could instead use that steel that had been intended for the chimney, which is 205mm deep, to support the load-bearing walls upstairs. So I called my structural engineer, who I haven't been able to get hold of for months, but luckily he answered the phone and was able to come around the day after to confirm that yes, according to his calculations, that steel would be more than adequate. So we now have 2 very large steels that I no longer need, but which I've paid for, sat on the lawn. Everything is obviously going to need building regs sign off, and I'm contemplating using a building regs consultant that I've previously used rather than engaging the council directly. It will cost more, but I think it's a much more efficient service. The other discovery we made was this crazy bit of brick infill in the corner of the wall that had some sort of oven, or we don't really know what, in the middle of it. And on removing this, we found quite a nice cutout to the wall. We thought about leaving this open, and I went on the brilliant DIY Kitchens website that I first heard about following a review I watched on Gosford handyman Andy Mack's YouTube channel. We might use them for our kitchen, and they've got a very good 3D visualizer, and that enabled us to see exactly what it would look like if we used that cutout. But actually we decided it wasn't really going to add a great deal of space for us, with the additional complications it would mean in terms of cutting out the joists in a tricky area to get the steel up into. So the builders set about digging new foundations, the existing ones below that not being adequate, and building a new brick pier to support the new steel. The day had arrived for installing the steel. My involvement up to this point had been mostly making cups of coffee, making the odd decision and ordering building materials, stuff like that. But today it really was all hands to the pumps, with 2 genie hoists hired for the day, ideally going back that evening. We used my DeWalt laser level again to mark out the joists that needed to be trimmed down in length. I found the reciprocating saw wandered too much. The chainsaw was much more accurate for this, particularly for these joists, which we'd be totally replacing. But by far the trickiest job was notching the top of the joist to make space for the steel beam to be slotted in. We tried a combination of tools, from my multi-tool, which was too slow, reciprocating saw and chainsaws. Our job was made all the more difficult by nails in the beams blunting the blades of the tools. And the unexpected star of the show was actually my steel chainsaw pruner, which, if you saw my video review of this last year, you might know I was slightly underwhelmed by. But it was brilliant for cutting these notches so close to the floorboards above. I just wish I had one more battery, because they really didn't last very long. And yes, I should have been wearing safety specs. With the joist finally notched, the steel beam was slid down the garden path on logs. I wish I had some footage of this, but I was just too busy at the time to record it. And lifted down the steps into the kitchen and onto the genie hoists. It could then be cranked up into the roof space and guided into position. With that done, I had a couple of joists to fix into position so the boys could finish the concrete block pier. This one's been glued and screwed, but I'm also going to bolt it. And the steel sits on concrete lintel pad stones, something I also had sign off on from my structural engineer. And I also checked this with a building regs consultant. It was Friday morning and the last job was to replace the joist below my daughter's bedroom. Quite an urgent job given she was coming home from college that evening. Unfortunately, the old oak beam would have to be sacrificed as the floorboards above were nailed down and we'd have to cut the beam out in sections. It was a messy job made worse by this fiberboard stuff which was weirdly sandwiched between the joists and the floorboards above. As the boys fixed the new joists in position at 400mm centres, I cut noggins to go in between, which are incredibly effective at strengthening and stiffening the joists. We currently have 2 rows in place and we'll be adding 2 more next to the wall and steel beam next week. My daughter's bedroom, whilst dusty, was largely intact. No mean feat given we had to prise the joists off the floorboards from below. Although I may take the opportunity to replace this with an engineered oak floor like I've done elsewhere, given we now have some massive gaps to plug around the steel. The door did have to be trimmed down as it didn't now open properly. And we have cracks, largely I think because the load on the floor was supported for nearly 2 days by the Acrows before we got the steel in position, although it is now safely packed with slate I found in the garden and sand and cement. So that's it for 1 week. I am exhausted, but I've got to dust myself down and start again tomorrow. As you've seen in today's video, electrics are in a terrible mess. They just fell out the ceiling where they should have been properly pinned when they were done back in 2010. But I've got an electrician coming in a couple of weeks, hopefully, to help me tidy all of that up. And this week's big challenge is to rip out the kitchen and dig into the floor because we're going to be putting in some underfloor heating. Finding it really hard to find any information on how this should be done properly in terms of depths. Insulation, I know that's about 50mm PIR, and also the sub-base concrete, I'm guessing, but I'm going to do a lot of research on that this week, and if any of you guys have done it, it'd be great to hear from you in the comment section below. Other than that, thanks for watching, and if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.